one of the biggest issues right now with all our partners and allies is that their networks are riddled with holes. They're owned by Huawei. They are, old as dirt. If the DoD wants to be able to project force abroad, if the DoD wants to be able to share information and receive information back from any of these partners and allies, we have got to fix and help them fix those networks.
My guest today is thespian and policy expert Tatyana Bolton. Tatyana is a leading voice in national cyber policy, having served in government and private industry, and she now leads critical coalitions shaping the future of cyber defense.
Those DoD contracts should be saying, no, we will not buy your product if, for example, you've been hacked using the same vulnerability more than once over the course of the last, say, few years. Stop accepting that large organizations can't defend against a known vulnerability. Yes, they can.
From her unconventional start as a theater major turned policy advocate, Tatyana brings us a unique perspective on how policy, technology, and industry must align to meet today's threat landscape.
We are actively getting attacked every single day. Russia, they were caught doing operations in a number of different critical infrastructure entities across Europe. We need to get up the baseline. We need to build our walls higher. We have to be more resilient. We have to be able to come back online faster. We need those incident response plans.
Our conversation spans the gap between slow-moving regulation on Capitol Hill and the urgent need to secure our infrastructure while keeping up with the technological speed of relevance, an increasingly complex and challenging gap to close. And now, here's Tatyana Bolton. Tatyana.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hello.
You're matching my energy.
Yes,
Perfect.
I am.
Good. All right. This is a high energy podcast.
Yes.
Because we have a lot to talk
There's
about.
dancing later.
I will be here for that. I stop at the dancing. I'll do the sitting. Okay. I'll do the talking.
Okay.
You lose me
I'll
with
do
the
it.
dancing.
I'll do the dancing for you if you will.
Well, that's the theater background. We were talking
That's
before we started filming. You have a theater background.
I do, funny enough. I have a degree in acting as well as political science. And that's obviously how I got into cyber.
I can see the direct line from acting to cyber.
Totally.
That's
what they, that was the other thing they teach you, right? Cheat out to the audience, speak loudly from your diaphragm, and don't forget your cybersecurity.
Yeah. Don't forget, learn how to type and all that.
That's right.
Let's start there. Let's start with, how do you go from theater and acting to cybersecurity?
Well, when I went to college, go Bucks, by the way, I went to Ohio State. I had two loves, and I loved acting, and I also loved political science, politics, national security. And so I tried to do both. And in college, you can do that, but then, you have to make a decision.
In the real world?
Yeah, you have to find a job. And I thought, I could probably find a job better in national security than I could in acting.
Famously difficult.
Lots of rejection. So I've always just really loved national security. My dad and I used to debate it all the time around the dinner table. So when I got my degree, that's the direction I wanted to go. And as I worked originally in the DoD, but more in the program management, budget, contract side, kind of picking up a lot is probably overstating it, but some expertise, enough to be dangerous on the management of large program side. I really wanted to get more into policy, and that's always been my first love. And so I got a position at CISA, and from then on, I just have really dug into cybersecurity, and I've loved working. I've loved working all the policies. I've done everything from cyber workforce to secure by design, supply chain risk management, sort of the waterfront. Because when I was at CISA, there were not a lot of, in the policy office, not a lot of people working cyber. And so,
Which is interesting for CISA.
Well, they have a lot of CISA's personnel for cybersecurity actually reside in the cybersecurity division, which is technically not the same thing as the strategy, policy, and plans division. Okay. And so they work together to create cyber policy, and I was in the policy side, and so I worked with the CSD folks, but because, we were working on any number of different issues, like something like 15, 16 different issues at a time, I got exposure to all of those and at the national level. So it was really interesting. It was fascinating work.
I wonder about the policy experience and like being up on the Hill and seeing like that particular sausage being made. My background is very technical. I'm a hands-on keyboard, and oftentimes like there's a lot of contention and friction between people who are setting policy and people who are doing the technical work. It's very foreign to me.
Well, we hope that there isn't. We hope that we can come together. And
that's not a you problem. That's an us problem. You put confines on what we do, and we're like, hold on.
Hold on a minute. No, I mean, when I was working at Google, one of the best parts of that was working with all the engineers that I got to engage with. Christoph Kern, for example, who wrote an article or a paper on how to create secure developer ecosystems. We worked a lot together on crafting smart policy recommendations around secure by design, because he really understood the concept of, or he arguably even, kind of created this concept of pushing the security further left in the design phase, right? From
when you say left, I'm not sure everyone knows the.
Sorry, right, left. Right. So
we're not political left.
Not political left. First there are the tools and the systems that developers use. Then it's the developers space and the coding. Then it's the user side, right, and what the users do. And what Christoph has been advocating for is pushing the impetus of security work and building kind of secure systems, building secure code onto the systems piece and the not even the developer side, but just the tools, creating kind of paths for developers, well-lit paths that anytime you kind of look for a tool, it's secure. It's been checked by security engineers, et cetera, and things like that. And so that's the kind of input and the kind of opportunity that I got as a policymaker to work with engineers. And I think that is the kind of policymaking that I like to do. We hope that policymakers are not making decisions without consulting their, the subject matter experts in the field. I will say that this is also true on a macro level, that the various different pieces of the policymaking process and the different organizations that are impacted should all work together as well. When I went into the federal government, and I'd always wanted to work for the federal government, I thought that is where you could have the most impact on policy. And I realized after having then worked in the private sector that the private sector also has a significant role and a significant expertise to provide to the debate. And so I think, and that's something else I think is really important, to not only to work policymaker to subject matter expert or coder, but also to work federal government, industry, together, public-private, so that you can get the best policy.
I may be prompting for a soundbite because I'm going to ask you like a question that's a very soundbite question, but policy making is very foreign to me. I just don't have any experience with it. What would surprise a layman or someone who's not involved with the policy process? Like, what about it would you be like, that's something people don't know how that works? Or
well, I don't know if nobody knows this, but I think it's the thing that often stymies a lot of people is that it takes a long time. To get a policy from conception to final implementation can take years or decades. So I think that's probably the thing that people don't know about it. And I'd also say that it's interesting. You'd be surprised how much repetition there is, and also how little our policy recommendations have actually changed from, even 15 years ago to today, because we haven't even been able to accomplish what was recommended by policymakers, in 2010.
Yeah, I read a good quote recently, and I'm gonna butcher it because I don't remember it exactly, but the point was like, if you want to get a message across, you need to repeat yourself for years on end.
Yeah.
That's the timeline to get a message across. You might have a novel idea. It's not going to take hold for a long time. You have to keep repeating it.
Yeah. I mean, it's some of these concepts, I think, secure by design showed up in various different forms over the last few, like the last decade, with updates, of course, but passwords and the debate we've been having about passwords and what the right, password configuration is has been kind of ever present from like the first time like that it was written about in Cuckoo's Egg, right? I think we want to have people who are thinking through all of the details, working across the various sectors, putting all the pieces together, and using the best of what we've already come up with to advocate for the right position now. I'm not one that likes to constantly create new policy, because there's already so much that hasn't
and it creates serious fatigue
implemented. Yes, it does create fatigue.
So as like a practitioner, one of the, I don't want to say criticisms, it's not a criticism, one of the challenges of working in like a regulated environment where we work in the DoD contractor space is policy, to your point, takes years to develop. And we're in a technical domain where years are decades. The way technology moves, the tooling. Talk about something like password policy today.
Yep.
If anyone's currently debating password policy, you're way behind. We're moving past that. Passwords,
right.
We're trying to get rid of that.
Passkeys, yeah.
Right. Or just getting away from passwords altogether.
Yep.
Passwordless, moving to authenticators that are strong,
right.
Biometrics, things like that. Mm-hmm. So one of the challenges we have as practitioners is when policy is not able to keep pace.
Yeah.
Again, in the world I live in, the DoD contractor space, we're going through CMMC and NIST 800-171 and these things. And one of the big challenges, we can see those policies or controls were written in like 2014. You can see it. It's implied what the architecture thinking was back then and how we've changed that. And so it's hard to translate because you're like, that was true a long time ago. Not really a long time ago, a couple of years, but again, a couple of years in IT is decades.
It's a lot. And that's actually one of the things that we're seeing a lot in one particular coalition that I'm working with right now. I'm the executive director for the Strategic Cybersecurity Coalition, and we're working on cybersecurity and FMS, which is foreign military sales, foreign military financing, DoD selling our weapons and capabilities tools to partner nations. We're seeing that process takes like 5 years, and we need to operate at the speed of relevance, and we're not right now. Policy making isn't keeping up. Sales aren't keeping up, or FMS at least, and so it's time gets us all, I guess, but it's a challenge. I just think that it's difficult. Cyber isn't like healthcare, for example, where you're only dealing with like one particular kind of subset of issues. Cyber goes across sectors. It's big companies, small companies. It's the international dimension. I think that it's very complicated to get all of those players talking to each other, getting aligned. That's why we're seeing a lot of effort right now around cyber harmonization. So so it's an effort to try and look across all of the various cyber regulations that exist and to try to make them speak to each other, or ideally remove the ones that are just compliance burdens that aren't actually improving security. I think there's a lot of those.
I would agree as a practitioner.
Right. We hear that a lot.
Yeah.
We hear that a lot from various different sectors, particularly the ones that have regulations right now. Not all sectors have a lot of regulation. That's the thing. It's also like a potpourri. But in the sectors that are regulated, there are, like, the SEC came out with, like, take information sharing as an example. SEC came out with a rule. There's also CISA that's coming up that will require information sharing. As a whole, there's something like 54 distinct cyber info sharing regulations or laws. 54.
Yeah.
They are not all. They do not all say the same thing. In fact, all of them say something different. Whether it's the speed of the reporting or the type of reporting, who you're reporting to, what information can be shared or what information they need. And so, our street actually came out with this report, many years ago, 2019, I want to say, and it's still accurate to this day. And so right now, both the administration and the Hill are taking a look at how can we harmonize some of these things. And again, these are conversations that we've been having for probably 5 years or so, probably more. And I think that there's an opportunity now to identify the regulations that are duplicative and find ways that we can encourage adoption of increased security baselines and stronger cybersecurity requirements within various sectors without doing like checklists for compliance.
Yeah, that would be. So a lot of times in my conversations, I come across as critical of like policy and compliance, and there's a refrain: compliance is not security, and that's true. But that doesn't mean compliance isn't a part of security, and policy is not a part of security. We need policy. It has parts to it, like you mentioned, a lot of duplicative, or as I mentioned, things that get stuck in the past when we're in this speed of relevance thing, where you have two very competing needs: to be compliant, but to also be at the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
To stay ahead of the competition, to stay relevant can sometimes be a challenge. It's a good thing that we have people looking at policy and understanding that there are duplicative policies. And there are controls that don't map to actually moving security forward. A lot of it can be security theater.
Yeah.
And it's not adjusting to time. One of my pet issues. Again, I'm in the DoD space. I'm in the CMMC space. On the whole, I think it's good. I think it's good to require people who handle sensitive data on behalf of the government. It's good to require a higher baseline of security. Mm-hmm. The world we're in with CMMC Level 2 requires you to do 110 security controls, individual controls. Some are very technical. You'll make sure your systems synchronize their time clock. Cool, get it. Then some are like, hey, have an incident response plan. Okay, the varying sort of degrees there. Not always easy for small businesses or smaller organizations to figure that sort of stuff out. And when the program itself comes with a lot of complexity, like there's a certification model and there's these regulatory bodies, and hey, the DoD says tell us within 72 hours if you have an incident, right, but CISA is going to say 8. Like just managing the model is hard enough. Doing the controls themselves is crazy difficult. Like that's the meat on the bone of these security controls, where it's tough to build an incident response program. A lot of times we talk to companies and practitioners who just can't engage with any of it because the policy is complex, the controls are complex, they don't know how to map it, and they get in this very analysis paralysis kind of thing. And we see people taking way too long to move forward because they've got 200 objectives in front of them. Or in CMMC Level 2's case, you have 320 assessment objectives that you have to make sure are getting done. Some have almost no security impact. And then some are like, hey, turn on MFA.
Right.
We talk to companies fairly regularly who aren't moving on the MFA piece because that's one of 320. And they're like, we don't know how to move any of it forward. We don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to do the wrong thing. So they won't invest at all until they get some clarity. And I'm like, man, I really wish we had simpler policy, a more realistic approach that wasn't just like, hey, here's the baseline, get there. But that was like, hey, here's a track. Mm-hmm. Get on this, solve these high risks first. Yeah. And let's make sure that's happening before we move to, here's the end stage, everyone get there.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that across both IT and OT. Particularly in OT, it's a challenge because a lot of those organizations are not used to dealing with cybersecurity. Right. They're like handling a water treatment plant, or they're running, like the pumps and valves of a manufacturing room floor. They want to focus on the availability of their system they care less, arguably, about the security. And then, but where those, where the controls are like 62443 for OT are extremely wide, were written for people who really understood security. So you really need people to kind of help them. And I think one of the ways that we're actually trying to help is to help organizations like NIST build like quick start guides for OT, but also for IT, for any of the various regulations, because people need to know where to start. And I think you're exactly right. Like if we could identify, 5 most important, like most critical risks to you or your organization, for many organizations, it's going to be pretty similar, and some baseline requirements, right? Like, and this is where I mean, like, just increase the baseline, do MFA, do some network segmentation, implement some of the zero trust strategies. I think those are pretty standard, and we can come up with, an easier way to approach a large kind of behemoth regulation like CIRCIA or CMMC or, 62443 in an easier fashion.
Do you think, so one of the traditional challenges, you mentioned checklists, and these things always boil down to a checklist. When you're handed like a list of controls, it ultimately comes down to like, okay, what do I need to do to like pass your assessment? That's how a lot of people engage with it,
right?
Because that's how it's presented.
Yep.
In CMMC's case, now we're going to be in a position where defense contractors have to put these controls into place and have them checked once every 3 years, which already we're seeing it's been out for, we've been doing assessments and certifications for about 8 months now as an industry. And already I've heard grumblings and rumors of, people are turning all the security stuff on for a week and then right off. They get the assessors in. And that's part of like, hey, you have this point in time that you can plan for. It's like passing a test.
Yeah.
So you're going to, get it all done, do your cram studying, and then
you hate to see it happen.
Turn it off.
You hate to see it happen. I mean, and that's why I think we have to continue to do the work of the cultural shift, to get people to think of cyber as a business risk, to get people to understand that like this isn't just a checklist for the purpose of like meeting some kind of random government requirement. It's a checklist to prevent your network from getting owned by the Chinese or the Russians, right? Or cyber criminals. We are actively getting attacked every single day. I mean, Russia, like if you take them as an example, they were just this week caught so many different they were caught doing operations in a number of different critical infrastructure entities across Europe. And that's always their breeding ground or their, sort of testing ground for coming to the US. So they're coming. And so we are vulnerable. There are risks. And so these regulations are trying to get ahead of that, the bad guys and we need to get up the baseline. We need to build our walls higher. We have to be more resilient. We have to be able to come back online faster. We need those incident response plans, right? So hopefully at least some of that will develop a muscle memory for the network engineers, for them to acknowledge that like, well, yes, we need to have some of this in place. I hope that people aren't, turning off a lot of those controls. But I think that speaks to regulations and laws that should be looking out for outcomes rather than specific controls. Yeah. I'm not saying no controls. I'm just saying like, if we are wanting to address security, we have to do it in a number of different ways. And one of them is just to look at like, who's getting hacked and why and how, because it's not equal.
Right.
Some hacks are, it's really stupid that you got hacked. Like that was an obvious mistake.
Most of them are.
Many of them. Take a look at the OWASP top 10. That list has remained the same for like a decade.
Right.
How is it that we are? And I think
how are you still getting SQL
Chase
injected?
Cunningham, right, talked about this, right? That's been the same for a decade, maybe more, and still people get hit with the exact same issue over and over. Why is SQL injection a thing anymore in 2025? Why is cross-site scripting a thing in 2025? I mean, it's yes, it takes money, it takes time to redo the code to look at your networks. But I mean, on the other hand, it's like if you know the problem exists and you just decide not to fix it, then at some point, like we've got to start making decisions that prevent that from happening in the places where it's most critical, at least for national security, but also, sort of across the board for the networks that we care about.
Yeah, I think policymakers, this is not to sound critical, but not all of them have such a progressive view on policy like you.
I'm obviously not
Obviously,
like a real
I'm
just like a different kind of policymaker. I'm one of the cool ones
Absolutely.
that you like.
But there definitely needs to be more of like a progressive view on like, I look at, again, the duty. It's the world I know, the duty contractors. Since 2018, we've had these requirements in place. Since 2025, a couple hundred companies have gone through this process. 7 years where we've not really moved the needle. In that 7 years, I've seen a quarterly report that DC3, the DoD Cybercrime Center, puts out. Every quarter they put out like, hey, what are the most common tactics being reported? I don't think I've seen a single quarter where it wasn't phishing by a long shot. Like the threats have not changed. Ransomware, moving laterally, has not changed.
Yep.
The same things have worked. In 7 years, I contend that if you just focused on those top 3 things and said, let's get everybody to solve these top 3 things instead of getting a few people to solve all 110 that NIST came up with.
Yeah.
Boy, do I think we would have been a lot more secure. And I think maybe that's a progressive view on it, but more frequent checks, more focus on the high risk areas than a 3-year time span to make sure, not only are you running an incident response plan, but we also make sure that your systems have their time clock synced up.
Yeah.
One of these things matters a lot.
Yeah.
One of these things is kind of nice to have and not a huge risk.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. You're talking, you're kind of talking the issues of like criticality and like being like, if everything's important, then nothing's important.
Right.
And so, I think we see that in a number of different places as an issue in cyber policy. Same with like the Section 9 list. There's been a lot of conversation around what are our critical entities? What's the list? How do we identify, is it this bank or that bank? Or is it this energy company or that energy company? Like which node is more important than another, right? Is it water or is it healthcare? What do you want more of?
Right.
I mean, kind of we need it all.
Well, how many critical infrastructure industries are there now?
Sectors. There's 16. There's 16 sectors. But a lot of people are talking about making cloud a critical infrastructure sector. But there are some in there that aren't as equal as others.
That's
right?
the point. If it's all critical.
Exactly. If it's all critical, nothing's critical.
Right.
And that's the thing. And then you get into the problem of that, the people who are trying to help, the people who are trying to set standards, the people who are making regulations also can't do it across so many different entities, sectors, because, there's hundreds of Section 9 list entities. If that's the case, how is CISA supposed to help them? Even to develop standards through the sector risk management agencies, the SRMAs. I don't know. Like it's almost impossible, and then you get into paralysis by analysis. And I think there's a strong case to be made that while it's important what NIST does in terms of standards making across the board, because I very much respect NIST and all of the work that they do, I also think there is something to just focusing the policy of the U.S. government in any particular given time to sprints around a particular issue. So, maybe this year, this next few years, maybe we can focus on, a particular issue. I think obviously there was a ransomware task force and a lot of effort around ransomware over the past few years. I think we can also, I think, say we've achieved some success there. We should take credit for the work that has been done. But like you said, phishing, still too commonplace, happening everywhere. And there are ways around it. There are email systems that are, protected better against phishing than others. There are browsers that are more phishing resistant, right? There are browsers that have built, that each each tab is sandboxed, right? That kind of became a standard, or at least the sort of the industry leading security policy when Google did it with Chrome, and I think these are the kinds of things we need to move towards, right? Where we know something is working, let's push in that direction, focusing on the things that are most impactful.
Taking phishing as an example, sort of a microcosm of where there can be this disconnect, the best way to combat phishing, we already talked about, is passwordless. Moving to authenticators that are themselves phishing resistant.
Right.
Be great if we could be more aggressive. And maybe that's just like, hey, that's the nature of the beast. You can't move the monolith that is the United States economy and all the companies that make it and be like, hey, everyone go this direction. We're all going to go passwordless. So I get there have to be constraints on it. But at the same time, again, the world I'm in, the newest version of these policies that came out does nothing to address that, and still talks about password policies, and the DoD issued their parameters that they want in their compliance regimen in the next version of it, 171 Rev 3, that includes like, hey, we want a password that's at least 14 characters or something.
Yeah.
And we're like, come on, pull on your lever, the massive lever you have as the DoD to enforce policy, and say, hey, let's move toward getting rid of that altogether.
Yeah.
And dealing with the biggest risk to the DoD's contractor network, phishing. That is the biggest risk. Every quarter I see that report, it's like 70% at least of the attacks that get reported.
Yeah.
Are through this very mundane thing where you have people clicking links and giving their credentials to people who shouldn't have them.
Yep. And I will say that, like, I would be all for that. I think we should be ambitious. Why shouldn't we try to move in that direction, right? Like, you're 100% correct. We need some of the big movers to kind of make that decision, right? That we are moving to passkeys. And we've seen that a lot. There's been the adoption of passkeys over the past couple of years has been enormous. I think Google's passkeys got something like 1.6 billion users to get passkeys over the past couple of years, like a lot.
One of my banks, I still have to sign in with a text message.
Yes,
like,
my bank, PNC.
Like, I'm going
to shame you a bit right here.
Right.
PNC, text messages, nonsense. That's not phishing resistant. And so I think, those are the things that the administration should focus on, right? How do we set the standard? How do we call out things that are no longer acceptable and move every agency, all of the big players, particularly in sectors that are well funded, right? Like finance, like energy, right? Move those into the right direction with the cutting edge technology. Don't start moving away from, requirements to like constantly change your passwords. I know there's still plenty of organizations that are telling people like, well, just remember, like, have a good password and then also make sure to change it every 4 months. That's not the standard. That's no longer a recommendation. Yeah. But people still use it because like they don't know. And, it's not, I also want to make the point that like, it's not on the users. I think the whole concept of, at this point, user training for like things like phishing is so far past where we need to be.
You're speaking my language.
It's ridiculous.
Well, this is that same thing. Shift left. Secure by design and software development, but also the more you ask users to be in charge of their own security, the worse outcomes you're going to get.
Yeah, the less secure we are.
Right.
Because users are going to make mistakes. Not only are they not familiar with cybersecurity, they don't care. They're trying to get somewhere as fast as possible. So it's on the coders and then the ecosystem developers to develop systems that are defensible and resilient. We shouldn't be doing what we did back in the day, like shipping products with default passwords or no passwords at all, and then expecting users to configure things right. The configuration managers, systems engineers that know exactly what they're doing, make mistakes on configuration management all the time. That's the other big issue, right? With one of the other big vectors, right? Something was misconfigured. Yeah. So why would we expect a user to be able to do it? I think we need to get away from everything related to get away from user training, get away from putting the burden on those on people, and or even like smaller organizations, and make sure that that big movers, DoD, the agencies, the big tech players are investing in state-of-the-art security solutions. They're updating their networks and systems. They are getting rid of old, outdated systems or products within their ecosystem, because I think that's the other kind of big vector of attack.
When you say users don't care, I think it's important to call out to the audience. We're not beating up on users. We're not saying the users are bad or they don't care about security. Their incentives lie completely elsewhere.
Right.
The consumers of software, users of IT systems, generally have a lot going on in their own workload, and they're focused on getting to their outcome the fastest way possible. The hardest thing for security, or the most detrimental thing, is we put security controls in place that prevent users from getting what they need done. So the first thing they do, by right, is try to work around it.
Yes.
Now, we wish they wouldn't, but we have to work within the confines of like their incentives, and business incentives are, hey, we got to get product out the door. No one's going to stop shipping product out the door because it's not the most secure process to get product out the door.
Or you haven't like run your 10-point checklist of security, checks.
You know what gets us paid? When people receive their product.
Right.
So we have to operate within those confines, and we're not saying, users can't be a meaningful part of the process. It's don't ask them to do any more than they're already having to do.
Right.
And cybersecurity, while it remains kind of simple for the most part, it's only getting more complex, and the adversaries are getting more capable. The technology, that speed of like relevance is like compounding. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to throw AI into the mix. Yep. Okay. Asking your users to, be fully aware of insider threats, phishing, acceptable use of IT systems, now acceptable use of artificial intelligence systems. At some point, you're trying to do too much. You got to shift things to the left.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's the whole concept of like the developer ecosystem piece is like users make mistakes, but like developers are users too. And so they'll make mistakes. That's why we want the systems themselves, the tools, to be secure. And then that way there won't be as many problems. That's why I like memory safe languages, right? But yeah, I think it's important that we're just doing whatever we can to kind of push in the right direction. Culture is also, like I said, a huge part of it, and leadership. And, I think there's a number of different things the administration can do. For example, CISA already puts out a list of top 12 most commonly exploited vulnerabilities. And there's, why are we not taking that list that the government's putting out on the one hand and coordinating that with the other hand of the people who are like, for example, procuring stuff, right? If you're buying tools, why don't you check against the CISA list? Why don't you not buy the tools that your own agency is saying is insecure and is commonly and most routinely exploited, right? I think those are some common sense things that we can do. And I think I've seen a trajectory of policy going in that direction. And I love that. I think it's really important that we think about that procurement acquisition side as a lever we can pull to ensure that security gets done. I think that arguably is stronger and will incentivize adoption of security controls within the bigger tech players and other security or other technology providers, because you are using the power of the purse of the federal government to actually identify what you do and do not want, and setting a line drawing a line in the sand. I think for too long there just haven't been any actual consequences for having bad and insecure products, because people kind of accepted it. Like, oh, sure. I mean, they're just, that happens. Things get hacked. My data gets leaked. I mean, basically it's already out there anyway, right?
Right. That very flippant attitude.
It's super flippant. And then you just kind of like give up. But I don't think we should give up. I think we should expect more. I think we should look, and do assessments and figure out which companies are actually doing really well on this. Let's go towards them. Let's buy them more, right? Let's get, change our approach. Think outside the box. Don't get stuck with the providers we've had forever just because they've been here forever. Let's be open to change. That is the hardest part. People hate change.
I appreciate where we're at talking about levers and the government. It's a pretty common experience. I go to a lot of like industry events, industry groups, and I do a lot with small business. That's where I spend most of my time and where I like to be. When we talk to our government counterparts about things like CMMC and compliance, one of the big things that gets thrown back to the government is like, well, hey, how about incentivizing? Instead of dangling a stick to scare us, dangle a carrot. Industry might not like to hear this, but in my experience, the only thing that has ever really moved meaningfully has been the stick. It has been that power of the purse to say, hey, listen, this is the standard we're setting. It would be nice if you got there, and sure, maybe we could offer you like a tax credit or something to incentivize you. I've not seen that move the needle much with people. Even progressive companies I talk to who understand the value of cybersecurity, they're always kind of asking, well, what's the minimum I have to do here? Like, what's the very least I should do? That's often the question we get. The government sometimes makes that simple for us to say, hey, we don't have to have a debate about this. That's the standard the government has set. And if you want your contract, that's what you're going to have to do. And the current experience we are seeing in real time, CMMC certifications were allowed to start in January. It's not in procurement yet. It can't be in any contracts. We're on the cusp of that. We're thinking October, November timeframe, that rulemaking will be in a position where contracts can include it. We're seeing a lot more companies ask about, hey, how do we get there? Mm-hmm. Because now it's becoming real. The fear is becoming real. That lever can be pulled to say, hey, we're going to shut off that flow of revenue if you don't meet the standard. It can be, maybe our government counterparts sometimes can feel a little afraid to admit that, because you don't want to be like the Grim Reaper who's like, hey, if you don't do it, it's going to be
That's a visual.
Right. But that they don't want to embrace that. So sometimes they're maybe a little too, I don't want to say too soft, but sometimes there is this desire to lean into like, hey, how can we dangle a carrot here?
Yeah.
It's okay to admit like, hey, if you don't do it, here's the stick. Like, this is what we have to do.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there's validity on both sides. I think we can find incentives that work.
Yeah.
And do those. And then also acknowledge that in many cases, voluntary adoption of standards has not worked. I think we can acknowledge that, like, we've been talking about MFA adoption for how many years? If we're not at 100% now, it's only because people don't want to. Like, they just don't want to.
Right. They don't want to deal with it.
They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to think about how to apply it, where it doesn't apply, have a debate about like, well, listen, like in this particular OT construct, like this PLC can't actually have MFA. So like, we need an exception. That's a process. That's hard.
Right.
I don't care. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. And it costs money. So, I think, like I said, I think that there can be incentives. Like, for example, there are like small businesses, right? You were talking about like you're a small business, you experience this, but also municipalities that are running water, or smaller organizations that are critical infrastructure owners and operators that just have no funding at all. And if they do have money, they're spending it on physical security. And so we do need to help those kind of organizations with incentives, because you can't do unfunded mandates. That just becomes a situation where a lot of people are out of compliance, and it doesn't necessarily increase the standard, right? When you're selling into the federal government, if you set the standard too high, like for example, if you put like CMMC, like level 2 or level 3 requirements, as I think they're considering for like the Golden Dome project, you will, kind of kick out everyone but the big primes. Yeah. And is that what you want? Is that the kind of ecosystem you want competing for those contracts? No, you want also not only those primes. I mean, there's great defense contractors out there, but there's also innovative smaller companies that also should be competing. It's an ecosystem. You want all of your best players participating. So you don't want to set it too high that only a certain few can jump over the hoop. But I also think that there are voluntary things that have worked. For example, incentives that have worked. The state and local cyber grant program being one of them. That provided money to the states, $2 billion, to get the the base level of cybersecurity up for all of the states. Now, it had some challenges, right? Like it was only authorized for 4 or 5 years. It had some like bureaucratic confusion because the states, had to figure out a process for like divvying up the money as it happens. But it allowed states to really invest in buying better tools, better technology, updating their infrastructure, updating their servers, their incident response plans, funding things like cybersecurity clinics in their states. They were able to do some of these things with that money, and that's up for reauthorization right now. It expires September 30th, and I'm a huge proponent of that program, and I think we should absolutely get that reauthorized because that type of incentive is really effective. Obviously, money talks. And so if we can, and I think one of the biggest issues right now is that for a number of different areas, we just don't have, in some ways, we don't have the requirements to drive the money, but we also just don't have the money. And so I think that's another issue.
All of this that we've talked about could be said just about the IT environment.
Yes.
And that's kind of where most of the conversation happens in cybersecurity, is about the IT environment. You're familiar with the CIA triad?
Yes.
Right. So confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Yep.
We talk 90% about confidentiality in the IT space. It's about the data and protecting the confidentiality of the data. You brought this up earlier around OT. OT people care about confidentiality, but that's not the main driver. These are things that need to be available. You're talking about sensors that respond to things like, hey, water leaks. Okay, you want a sensor that's always online because you want to know quickly to interact with, a pump or whatever to stop a leak. IT can kind of dominate the conversation. I think OT, not to say it's the Wild West, but it's definitely not.
You could say it's the redheaded stepchild. I think that would be accurate.
Yeah, more like a second-class citizen in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so I know that's pertinent to your role because you lead a coalition on OT.
Yes, I lead the Operational Technology Cybersecurity Coalition, the OTCC. And in that coalition, we have owners and operators and a lot of OT companies that care a lot about the baseline standards of cybersecurity across the OT environment. And what we found is that, OT is just under-prioritized. It's not in the conversation. It doesn't get talked about enough. Most of the conversations most models, most policies are based around an IT environment and then kind of ported over to OT or if they're even discussed. And we also find that, like I said, it's very underfunded. Of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, how many of them are actually mature in terms of their cybersecurity? Not a lot. Yeah. We're actually putting out a report soon, or a paper that's called the SRMA Maturity Model Concept, the Sector Risk Management Maturity Model. So it's a concept around what maturity do you want your SRMA to have? If you are an agency that is telling entities within a sector what to do, then maybe you should have a particular you should have a maturity. You should have particular things put in place, right? And so that's what we kind of lay out. It's a 5-layer or 5-level maturity model where if you take a look at it today, and now we didn't grade any sectors, although, boy, would I have loved to. That would be fun.
Be an interesting paper to read.
That would be fun. But we suggest that NCD does. We suggest that the National Cyber Director has that role and plays the role of identifying the maturity of all the sector risk management agencies, and then for the lowest performing, get them to provide a path to improved maturity, because we need that. Yeah. And so, if you take a look right now, how many would you say are are really mature?
I mean, I interact with a handful of them, and they all have major challenges.
Yeah.
And they're all surprisingly. So I joined the DoD space in 2017 timeframe. Prior to that, I had that idea that the DoD space was all highly funded, so everything was advanced. You think of the big companies and F-35 and all that, and you're assuming these are super fancy. Capable.
Yes.
I've been doing it for a while now, and
they have subs. They have all the
Right.
things.
Yeah.
They fly,
It all seems
undetectable
super
aircraft.
advanced. And then I've met some people at primes on their security teams, hearing about the infrastructure. I'm like, oh wait, you guys are still on that architecture that was relevant in 2014. I mean, it is.
Well, it is still a bureaucracy,
Right, exactly.
and
these are
I
still
wouldn't.
big organizations. They don't. These are aircraft carriers. They don't turn quickly.
They don't. And I mean, I would say maybe 2 or 3 of the sectors are a level, maybe even 3, maybe 4 on our maturity model. Most.
Who's the most?
I mean, financial services, energy, obviously the most mature, possibly telecom, but then you've got healthcare, water. I mean, the chemical sector. Like, what are they doing on cybersecurity? Nothing. Not nothing. That's probably rude.
Those ones who are out front immediately come to mind as the ones that I've seen regulated for the longest. Is that part of it?
I mean, that certainly is part of it, but also funding. The financial services companies, are protecting money. And so they've put money into the next stage of, robbery, right? Not no one, but very few people are breaking into bank vaults.
Right.
People are trying to break into bank accounts or use phishing to capture people's money, right? Yeah. And so they have invested a ton of, they have an incentive to protect against cyber intrusions when it's not money, but rather a kind of a more abstract concept of being able to turn off or poison water, what was attempted in Oldsmar in Florida a few years ago. That doesn't, get people's butts out of their seats the same way.
Right.
Because you don't see that immediate harm. It's a theoretical harm. It's a possible harm. Russia, China, Iran sitting on our energy grid or our other critical infrastructure sector networks hasn't actually drawn as much interest or change in policy or direction or prioritization of these issues as you would have thought.
Yeah.
So after Salt and Volt Typhoon, what have we seen coming out of the government talking about these issues? Not enough, I would say. I think
certainly not where it matters, like on the Hill.
Right. I mean, we haven't seen any efforts. And I think part of that, of course, is like within a presidential transition, we didn't have the right people in place yet, right? The NCD only just came in, Sean Cairncross, in the last month. We still don't have Sean Planke at CISA. Nick Anderson thankfully got there at the end of July, but it does slow it down, right? It's slow that piece is really necessary to get things to start moving. Really excited that Nick and that Sean are in those roles now, getting started, and their staffs have been pushing things along, and we're very eager to work with them on any of these issues. But back to that whole question around OT, I think you brought up DoD, right? When you think about OT, we don't even know what we have.
Right.
DoD hasn't even done their asset inventory for OT. So who are we kidding here? We're not even not even, it's sad. I don't even have words.
So, I think about OT, you mentioned the speed of relevance is like this thing. Of the different areas of technology where we've seen a ton of change, OT is up there. Now you have the whole IoT concept. You have networked sensors, wireless network sensors, cameras, all kinds of, everything's connected. Mm-hmm. And the incentive is get these things online as quickly as we can, because now we can open up way more automation. Right. There are good reasons to bring all that stuff online.
And sometimes even security, right? Why are people putting cameras and sensors online at airports and or manufacturing facilities to prevent break-ins or theft or,
it's good incentive to have terrorism, these things come online.
Right? Yeah. And so part of it is that they're trying to add security, but they're also creating additional holes on the cybersecurity side. And I think we just have to make sure that we're considering that, that we have policies in place, that we have investment in those areas, that there's that there are requirements, and DoD only works in requirements. And so, if there's no requirement to, for me to invest in OT security, if the COCOM or the service isn't actually saying like, here's my line item for like OT security or OT cybersecurity, who's putting money against that?
Yeah.
No one. No one's putting money against that. And so we have to make sure that the leadership is driving that change. And I think, so Kirsten Davies, who's coming in as the DoD CIO, and Katie Arrington, who's there right now, I think they understand this. And I think they've really leaned into the OT issue. And so I'm very eager to see what they do on the DoD OT side, incorporating all requirements around IoT as well. Because I think you can't protect what you don't know. And you're certainly not going to build a requirement if you think that like you've got maybe a few small OT issues, but you realize like, actually, it's a giant ocean of shit. So like, I'll give you a fun anecdote. So at CISA, when I was there, our hunt teams went out to an unnamed entity that they had seen some malicious traffic on. So they'd seen something. They went out there. They were talking to the entity, and they asked them, "How many nodes do you have? How many how much of your OT equipment is open to the internet?" And they're like, "Oh, well, just right here, what you see, like in this office. I mean, our computers and all this stuff. So probably like maybe 20, 30. And they were like, "Really? Because we're seeing traffic that's definitely not right here. And we're seeing stuff that like wouldn't be happening if you didn't have open nodes somewhere." And they were like, I don't think so. They ended up using the telephone bills and the internet bills to identify the fact that they had something like 10,000 connections to the internet.
It's a bit more dramatic than I was expecting.
Because they had every single, this was like a pipeline company or like an oil company where they had like huge, like large swaths of, network going out across everywhere. And they had installed remote access points all across this huge network. And no one was tracking those things. And they didn't even think about it. They didn't even think about it.
So I'm a cybersecurity professional. I had this the other day cross my mind, talking about IoT and things being online. My wife was telling me the TV that the kids watch keeps going offline. So I'm like, all right, fine. I'll go look at the Wi-Fi and figure out what's going on. And I got in and I'm starting to figure out like, all right, where's the TV? I've got like 50 devices on. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, wow, there's like 5 of us in this house. There's 2 adults in this house. Yeah. There's phones, there's laptops, there's TVs. We've got, water leak sensors. We've got our door. We've got camera. It's like, man, this is just a residential house for 2 adults. We've got 50 things online that I kind of forgot about and take for granted. Any one of those could become vulnerable and become an issue, and boom, someone will come in. Yeah,
and I did IoT work when I was at Google because I worked a lot with Android, and they're participating in,
which is superior to iOS. I'll just say that.
I do tend to think that pixel pictures are the best. Yeah. And I don't actually think it. I actually like to play a little game at parties where I'll have someone else with an iPhone who thinks they're better take a picture, the superiority of iPhone users because, blue bubbles and all. They take a picture and then I'm like, okay, I'll take a picture with my phone and we compare. And then they're all confused. Poor sweet things.
This podcast is not sponsored by Google yet.
That's right.
But if you're listening, we're interested.
So, Android participates in CISA, which has been building the Matter standard for a while, which actually puts in a 10-layer security control for iOS devices precisely because of this issue.
IoT
devices, yeah. And so it's cameras, anything that can be connected to the internet that is a thermostat, the light switches, the light bulbs, there's so many devices.
Yeah.
People just plug them in and don't even think about it. There have been counterfeits. They're made in China. Can't imagine how that could go wrong. There's, home network hubs like the Alexa or, the Google Home, and all of these are talking to each other. But like nobody thought about like, if a light bulb is telling like the Google Home or the Alexa what to do, maybe that's a problem. We should not have that be a thing, right? The light bulb should never tell the Alexa device what to do.
Right.
And so that's something that like the Matter standard puts in place. And I think that's great. Like we're moving forward, but that's not necessarily the case in industrial uses. And it's not the case right now within the DoD. It's not required. And so, obviously all of the big players are actually voluntarily adopting this standard, but not all. And so, I think we're making progress. And of course, like the big players, the responsible players are investing in this stuff. They are, and they're incentivized to protect their own networks. And so, I think that's good. But on the bigger, like for OT, we're not seeing the same type of thing. Like there's 62443 out there, but like we talked about before, people don't even know where to start. So integrators will show up to a site where people have asked them to do a review, say like, Fairfax Water or something like that. We're in the DC area today, and they haven't done an assessment for like 10 years. They haven't looked at their network at all. You're like, oh my God. I live here. I'm not picking on Fairfax
It's like
Water.
one of the biggest, wealthiest counties in the United States.
I know. And maybe it wasn't Fairfax. Maybe it was like Loudoun or something else. I don't know. I mean, they all do like good work, but at the same time, sometimes it's like the easiest things have been overlooked because it's not that people aren't trying or don't care.
It's never that.
There's so much to do.
Yeah.
And so it just gets forgotten. And so like they haven't done an assessment. And then you go in and they ask like, well, what do you recommend? I got asked this question actually when I was testifying before House Homeland Committee on OT security a month ago. They're like, when I go back to my district, what do I tell them to do? Like if there are, the water facility or the municipality that's running my energy or, whatever, or my hospital, what do I tell them to do? And it was, between the various witnesses, we mentioned probably 2 or 3 different top 5 lists that exist. CISA has put one out. SANS has put one out. There's other recommendations. These entities, the representative was like, then what am I supposed to tell them? That like, that is not helpful.
Yeah.
That is not helpful. It's not helpful to have competing top 5 lists or, no top 5 lists at all in some instances. And like, they don't know where to start, even if they have that state and local grant funding, right? But they have no idea what to spend the money on. They just go and spend it on a much easier thing, right? And so I think that's where we've gotten. And I think we need to find better ways, quick start guides, like identifying, the first steps for people, helping them walk through the process. Because you can't expect people to just jump into a, 200-page document and, be running when they're not a cybersecurity expert.
Yeah, it makes it very hard to approach something that's already very unapproachable.
Right.
And then you mentioned this earlier, like talking about the finance sector. That translation of damage to loss is clear. You lose the money, you lose the money.
Right.
The further you get from that, the more abstract it becomes, the harder it is to get people to understand, why do I need to do these controls anyway? Yeah. And then if you make them unapproachable and you put people in that analysis paralysis and, hey, the FBI says do these 5 things, CISA says do these 5, then the DoD says do these 110. Okay, hold on. Who do I listen to? Which one of you guys has authority?
Yeah.
Who has the best advice? It really just puts, I see this day in and day out, it puts even decent sized businesses into a position where they don't know what to do. Yeah. And you also made another great point, which is the people doing this stuff, they care. They're trying. All the time we come into a company where their IT admins are kind of frustrated that we're there and that we're asking questions. They get very defensive because they know how much they wish they could get done. Right. But we always say like, hey guys, don't be on the back foot. We're not here to like pass judgment. We're here to help. We understand as a small IT admin for a small shop, you're being asked to do way more than you can reasonably do. And that's just kind of the nature of where things are at.
Yeah.
It's hard, but these people always care.
Yeah.
Everyone I've ever talked to, no one's ever been flippant or been like, yeah, we don't really care about security here.
Right.
They're always trying to do their best. It's just very resource constrained.
They have way more line items below the line than they have above the line, as DoD would say, right? The above the line being things that are approved and funded, and the things below the line where they wish they had it and they don't. Right. And I think that's where the incentives piece comes in. We need to figure out how to get more of that stuff above the line, both in terms of adding it in as a real requirement that both, either a business or a government is setting as a priority, and then also funding those things, because it just, it goes hand in hand. I very much understand why, people hate unfunded mandates. Even NIST, for example, right? Over the course of the last few years, having worked in this kind of like policy space, a number of times, this has been always very interesting to me, a number of times there were great recommendations around like, hey, NIST, you should do this for cyber. Like you should write this, or you should be in charge of that. And NIST, to their credit, always pushes back and goes, hold on a minute. Do we have budget for that? Like, are you also putting in appropriations? And the answer is often like, well, no, we don't have approved appropriations for that. And then they're like, no. And that's fair, because they are a, fairly small team working to do a huge job, and adding more stuff to their plate is not a great idea. Arguably, I think that this is where CISA, got a little bit out in front of their skis over the past 4 years. I think, I am one to say that I think, CISA absolutely needs to be funded appropriately to do the work they need to be doing. And there's a lot of stuff that was cut, like threat hunting, for example, that I think should never be cut. There's not enough of it as it is. CISA, I think, had something like 6 or 10 hunt teams, whereas like the Cyber Mission Force at DoD has like 133.
Yeah, I would have assumed CISA, whose mandate is
to help and support and protect our critical infrastructure, would have more than 6 to 10, teams. Yeah, you would think that, but they weren't funded at that level. And so, if you think about it from the perspective of offense versus defense, like, yes, we should improve our offense, but I also think we really desperately need to improve our defense. And the work that needs to be done on the resilience side is way overdue. Like that homework is real late. So I think that there's actually a lot more that needs to be done at CISA. But I also think that like every time an idea came out from the policy community that said, you know what, CISA should lead this, or CISA should do that. CISA should be in charge of secure by design. CISA should be in charge of this. Like we need to, and it stood up a bunch of different offices with a bunch of different new authorities that were given to it by Congress. Not CISA, but they were willing to take it on.
Sure.
And so I think that's where, we've gotten into this debate about like, well, what is CISA's core function? What is CISA set up to do? I think that's where they kind of got, I think that's what created a few problems, is that, they took on, I'm not going to say unfunded mandates, because they actually did get more funding, but mandates that I think, just kind of diversified their efforts too wide.
Which makes sense. I mean, the new energetic kid on the block, the new agency, it's got to make a name, got to claim its territory and all that. And I don't think that's the pure motivation of like the leadership to say like, hey, let's build our kingdom. Right. But like, yeah, we want to help. You got a problem for us to solve? Cool. We're here. Yes. We're excited. We got money. Let's go solve that problem.
Again, to the point of everyone is trying to do their best and is really trying to help protect the nation's cybersecurity. But, I think we'll see. I mean, I think it'll be interesting how Sean Planke directs the agency and where he goes with it. So, to be seen.
Let's talk some bold ideas.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. I'm going to press you on bold ideas because sort of a theme that we've talked about. When we issue these policy requirements, they can be, as we mentioned, unapproachable, or, the thing I brought up with CMMC, where it's going to create a condition where you plan for it, you pass it, and then there's 3 years in between where you're not doing much. And that's once you decide to beat your analysis paralysis and actually do something about it. That tells me, like, in the core concept of how we're trying to implement policy, there's a major issue. I don't know how to answer it or how to solve it, but I'm not a policy person. You got any bold ideas?
Well, so I think that my thing is the procurement side. You've got to tie in procurement into security. In your contracts, those DoD contracts should be saying, no, we will not buy we'll not buy your product. If, for example, you've been hacked using the same vulnerability more than once over the course of the last, like, say, a few years, that would, you know how many people that would, like, piss off?
Well, how many that would?
A lot.
But that to immediately counter that would be, I think, if I'm not going to pick on a single company, but imagine like a Lockheed. I think if that happens to like a Lockheed, it's not a realistic option for the DoD to not procure from Lockheed Martin. I
don't know. They've got Booz. They've got BAE. They've got Boeing.
But what if those 5 right there decide, like, hey, we're not playing your game? I mean, there is something of a power struggle there. And one of the things I've often thought when it comes to things like CMMC and the wielding of the stick to say, hey, you're not going to be awarded that contract if you're not passing the requirements. I wonder who actually carries the influence at the DoD when procurement says, hey, you guys can't have this because the company that makes it isn't secure. My contention is I think the people with the real power can override that and say, that's called an enduring exception. We want that.
We've seen that happen all the time. So as I mentioned, I worked at the DoD. I was at the Navy. I was a contracting officer there. And I saw that firsthand where, like, you took a look at the contract, didn't make any sense for this thing to be sole source, but it was overridden by the admiral, right? And so I'm not saying that there won't be exceptions, but I'm saying, like, to your point about, like, stop putting in the requirement for default passwords to be 15 characters. Stop accepting that, large organizations can't defend against a known vulnerability. Yes, they can. Yes, they can, and they should. And so I think we need to increase our expectations on our providers. And it's not to say that, like, I'm blaming the victim here, right? Like, I'm not saying if you have a determined adversary, particularly an APT, right? Because they are advanced, they are persistent,
yep.
Right? That's in the name. If they're coming after you and you get hacked by them once, I get it, right? Nobody's saying that you shouldn't be. Well, is it novel though?
It can be.
Most, again, let us just set the stage here for the listeners. It's not usually a 0 day.
Yeah,
it's not. Like, let's just be real.
They are using sparingly.
Yeah, they don't like. I used to work with Heather Adkins at Google, right? And she would be like, when it's a 0 day, I'm actually like, yeah, that's great. Waste your 0 day on me, because they're crazy. They're expensive, something like $500,000 to $1 million to develop, right? Waste them on me, because I'd love to see them. What is it? What's that 0 day? And 2, I think I can defend against it because she believes in her security, right? On the other hand, like, it's mostly like phishing, credential theft. Like, come on, right? And if you are a pretty big player and you're getting hit those ways, like if you haven't closed the gap on like a SQL injection vulnerability in your network, I'm sorry, but I have less and less patience and empathy for big players that are crying foul when organizations are actually trying to hold their feet to the fire. I have no empathy for you. I'm sorry. But like, if you know that like the OWASP top 10 says SQL injection, cross-site scripting, like those are the biggest vulnerabilities that are most routinely exploited, I would think that you would expend just a little bit of effort to protect your networks against
especially when the resource accumulation tends to be much higher up there, and the ability to spend.
Sure.
Which takes me to, one question I want to ask you, which is in that responsibility, that sharing of responsibility. Right now, I think we're pretty far to the extreme of like, hey, it's every man for themselves at some level. ultimate responsibility for the small machine shop that makes the part that goes into the assembly at another company that then goes into, the harness that then goes to another company that then finally gets to the F-35. Those 5 layers removed. We're telling that small machine shop, defend yourself against China.
Right.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're paying them, they're making 6% margin on getting a couple screws out the door kind of a thing.
Sure.
Like, they don't have the budget for that.
Yeah.
This happens all the time. I talk to a very small business who's a critical player in a weapons program or whatever else. And we tell them about the cost to do the requirements. And a lot of times they're like, hey, either we can't do business with the DoD anymore, so we can't make this part, or I, as the small business entrepreneur, will not contribute to my 401k this year. Mm-hmm. Like, it's at that level.
Right.
No one seems to really be helping them. And, sometimes I talk to a prime contractor who's kind of interested, mm-hmm. but they never really see it as their responsibility.
Yeah.
And I wonder, are they culpable? Like, do we need to shift the responsibility and start telling them, hey, you're responsible for your supply chain and helping them, not just covering your butt by sending them a questionnaire to say, hey, they told us they were compliant. But no, you have to invest some of those resources that you have at your size and scale to go help that supply chain so that, that compromise doesn't lead to a compromise of the whole program.
Was Katie Arrington on
before? No, she wasn't.
Because I feel like you've been talking to her. So Katie Arrington cares a lot about supply chain security. And she's a big proponent of like SWIFT, which has at this point voluntary requirements for supply chain security and assurance. And I think that needs to be significantly bumped up, right? Maybe make those requirements rather than voluntary controls, right? Big players need to be doing supply chain security, and they need to be responsible for all of those outcomes, back to the outcomes being more important than a compliance checklist, right? Yeah. We need to make sure that we are writing some of those supply chain assurance pieces into standards, right? Into agreements that we're making. And that, I think, will incentivize the larger players to really start caring, to actually, and I think there are some players, I can't speak to names, but where I remember when I was doing this at CISA, that we're actually working with their suppliers, and particularly the smallest ones, to get them up to the standards that they needed to be, that they were working with those people that couldn't.
I've seen a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Far more often, what I see is there is increased engagement on this front by way of longer and longer questionnaires, more onerous bureaucratic red tape for these small businesses who are like, hey, we're not cybersecurity professionals. Why are you asking us all this crazy detailed stuff?
Yeah. Like, I'm just making a screw.
Right. The refrain is like, I'm just trying to get parts out the door. Right. And so your way of engaging with me and trying to help is by asking us to spend all this time and effort and energy. And it's just, there's always like this breakdown of I think what works at that level and what works down here. Yeah. As an example, NIST 800-171, the requirement that CMMC is enforcing, revision 3 is published. NIST has published it, so that's the current revision, but DoD is not using it yet. But they're on a short track to put that into place. One of the new requirement families is about supply chain risk management and managing your supply chain. Those same requirements are going to apply to Lockheed as they apply to that small machine shop who doesn't have the capability,
right? And
they're not at the same risk level, but the same requirement set's going to go to those same companies. It's very imprecise.
Yeah, and it's a hard problem because, like, in the end, if you are putting something into the F-35, which is like a flying computer, then you need to make sure that all of those pieces aren't the ones that are introducing a vulnerability, right? Because if you've got something that you're delivering to the DoD and it's got like 5,000 components, then unfortunately you have to do a review of all those 5,000 because who we're up against? China.
Right.
They will take any opportunity.
Well, they know who the soft targets are.
Right. It's and they go after them. Right. And so that's the problem, is that they're not coming after Boeing or Lockheed. They're coming after the tiny producers, and it's hard. So like that's where the risk is, but that's where very little expertise and resourcing is. And so, it's a challenge. I'm not going to lie. Like I don't think anyone's perfectly figured it out yet. But like there was a Scrim task force that looked at this. There's some companies like Exeter, for example, that are doing a lot of Scrim work and have done like assurance models for places like Schneider. I think they put out a report together about how they worked jointly to address some of these supply chain risks and how they can, how Exeter kind of like does an assurance playbook. And so, I think that's the kind of thing that we need to move towards, right? Where we have a playbook for these issues and we can actually move it in the right direction. And so, I think it's not insurmountable, but it's damn hard.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably a refrain of policymaking in general.
I know.
It's an unsexy business.
Why did I pick this again?
Right.
I could have been acting.
Well, you started at the beginning by saying like this was one of your loves, and
I know
you chose to do this, and you wanted to be in the federal government. These are not common pursuits. A lot of people, like I said, policy is not a sexy endeavor.
I know. Well, sometimes, we do get to go to some nice events sometimes, but it's mostly just, looking through a lot of documents, a lot of paper, a lot of lines, a lot of like one word can, shift an entire piece of legislation from being great to being crap. So, there's a lot of risk to it, but, we hope that we get it right. And it's working on a lot of really interesting topics. Like I talked about FMS a little bit before, and the Strategic Cybersecurity Coalition. That is focused on kind of fixing this issue, fixing the issue of cybersecurity support to our partners and allies within the FMS and FMF process, which is the foreign military sales process, which, talk about not doing things at the speed of relevance. Oh my God. It's a process that was built for F-16, F-35s, Tomahawks, which of course, I get it. If you want to buy one of those, systems and you're one of our partners, sure, I get it. A 4 or 5 year review process, but cyber goes bad.
Right.
Allie King says this a lot, who I love. She talks about this a lot. It's like milk. You can't put a bunch of routers on the shelf like you would a bunch of radios and then be able to drive a truck up to that depot, pick them up and ship them to the partner when they need it, right? You can't buy surplus and then ship some if the DoD decides that a nation like Ukraine needs support. Can't do that with routers. 5-year-old routers? What? Secure computers? Worse.
All the protocols they run on have changed, have
Correct.
iterated.
And if they've been sitting there for a while, you're shit out of luck. What a terrible choice you just did. You just gave them an active vulnerability. Bad, right? Switch routers with software licenses, and it just completely makes no sense. But we're still trying to approach that process in the same way that we do those giant weapon systems. And so that's what we are, kind of advocating for, changing the process by which cybersecurity gets bought within FMS. I will also say most people don't even know that that company or that the DoD sells cybersecurity tools and services through the FMS process, right? Many people don't even know that that's happening. And then there's a lot of inertia within the DoD, within State Department, to kind of keep it in those same kind of processes. We're arguing or advocating for the adoption of different processes, different authorities for cyber. One of those being the Direct Commercial Contracting Authority. Many people don't know about it. It was started during the Camp David Accords. It is for 10 specific countries right now, for Israel, Jordan, those like the Camp David Accord countries. And that process takes about a year, right? That's how we are getting weapons to Israel. A lot of people are, what we are advocating for is to take that authority and to expand it for cybersecurity, not to make it unavailable for other weapon systems that the DoD has decided to sell through it, but just to expand it. If it works, let's use it for cyber. It's a much faster authority. It allows us to operate at the speed of relevance for cybersecurity and, provide it for not just those 10 countries, but for whatever other countries the DoD decides is critical for cybersecurity support, right? Because if one of the biggest issues right now with all our partners and allies is that their networks are riddled with holes. They're owned by Huawei. They are, old as dirt. The Greek government is operating with 2003 servers from 2003, right? And, our partners in Southeast Asia, Huawei is crawling China is crawling all over those networks. They're Huawei. We have gotten it out of our networks, but what about our partners and allies? If we want to be able to work with them, if the DoD wants to be able to project force abroad, if the DoD wants to be able to share information and receive information back from any of these partners and allies, we have got to fix and help them fix those networks. Some of them are, of course, putting their own money against it, right? That's the FMS piece. But some of them need help and support. That's the FMF side, right? Or cyber grants. So, I think this has been a fascinating issue to kind of dig into.
You talk about how we're applying the same logic and how we sell an F-16 to software. And I love the analogy of it's milk on a shelf. It can't sit there. It's going to become useless. It all feels so imprecise. That's a word I've used a couple of times. Man, we're just really lacking precision when it comes to understanding what the cyber domain is, what information, what all these systems look like and how they're iterating and how quickly they're iterating. I'm just constantly man, why are we so attached to traditional ways of doing it? Don't we recognize this is an unconventional, untraditional, totally different way of thinking about systems, right? And now it's all going to get worse because now we're going to talk about AI.
Yeah.
Right. And that compounding nature, if you believe in what AIs can be capable of, which I know is debated, it's going to be able to compound and move technology development faster and faster. And it's not going to be, hey, if you're a couple of years behind in your router, you're behind. It's going to be if you're a couple of months, a couple of weeks, if your software is not actively day in and day out getting better and better and better, you're going to fall behind because the adversary is going to use that same technology to try to get better and better and better at compromising yours. Yeah. We have to figure out ways from a policy and process standpoint to keep pace with that. It feels a little bit like that movie, Don't Look Up. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that? Yeah. Where you're come on, it's right there. Yeah. We need to do something. And there's always a reason we can't.
A process, 10 different people have to talk to each other. There needs to be a DCC in the White House. There needs to be, this agency first has to talk to that agency and it has to be in this particular order and then 10 signatures. And you're
right.
Oh, geez.
Right. And it's just,
we're gonna die.
We understand why the bureaucracy has to exist. We have to have these processes, but sometimes it's the risk is pretty imminent. Yeah. We have to figure out, guys. Right. We have to figure out some efficiency.
Saying, speed it up. And a few points there. So one, again, people hate change. So trying to get to change bureaucratic inertia, to get them to do different things is difficult. There are plenty of people within within DoD, within State Department that see the problems and are trying gallantly to fix them. But there's just as many people who just are well, this is our process and we have done it this way. And this is, it exists for these reasons. And that is therefore why we will continue doing it. I'm not going to say one way is better than the other way. But certainly I think approaching a new problem with old ideas is inadvisable. Yeah. Like fighting a new war with the old wars, concepts and strategies. Bad idea. We've seen that every single time, right? I think, it's a truism, and my degree is in national security policy, my master's. So, it's a truism that most of the time, most countries are going into the next war, fighting it and strategizing for it as if they thought they were fighting 100%. The last war. we're having this problem now, right? I think, and the second point, I think cyber is very much like crime, to be honest. I think it is, we're always going to have adversaries, we're always going to have criminals, but then we're always going to have defenders.
Yeah.
We're always going to have police and FBI involved and trying to track down, what's happening, who are they, let's
always be cat
let's
and
take them
mouse.
down. It's going to be cat and mouse. But, that means that when AI gets released in the wild and everyone has now figured out how to use, either Gemini or OpenAI to improve their offensive cyber weapons, we have got to improve our defensive, our resilience and our defensive weapons just as much. Weapons is not the right term, but we've got to figure out, how do we do vulnerability scanning faster? How do we build secure tools for developers with AI? How do we catch adversaries? How do we improve our attribution speed with AI? And I think there have been a number of different reports that have come out that have talked about new and improved tools, ways of thinking. And I think that, so we're making progress, but it's going to take us a while. And I think we just have to move faster than the adversaries.
Yeah.
We've already seen greatly improved phishing emails. We've seen, because adversaries can now use AI to write in a different language, much better, with less mistakes. We've seen a huge increase in spear phishing because adversaries are now able, instead of crafting just one email to one particular target that they've done a lot of research on, over the course of a week, we're now seeing them being able to produce hundreds of those in the same space and time it took them to produce one. So that's why it's so important that we have phishing, that we implement all of these best practices and controls that we know work, phishing resistant MFA, and browsers that are more secure, and collaboration software that isn't constantly hacked every other day. We need to make sure that we are implementing all of those, because the offensive side is not waiting. Our adversaries are not waiting. China's not waiting. Russia's not waiting. It's not going great right now in Europe with those critical infrastructure attacks.
We have to do all that, and we can't meaningfully slow down the progression and the advancement.
Yeah.
Like, one of the big topics around AI is, like, we have to get our hands around it. We have to control its growth. But you have to control its growth without limiting its growth, because the adversary, they don't care as much about safety.
Yeah, I know. There was a bill proposed for a full moratorium of regulation on AI because there's no we can't like slow the growth. I think that's a little far. Right? China's regulating AI and still managing to, innovate and compete all day long. I think there's some baseline standards we need to set, but I do think that we need to invest in this as much as possible. We need to see its capabilities. We need to bring in new and interesting minds and let people play with it and see what they can do. I think even over the course of the last 2 years, we've just seen exponential growth, ideas coming up left and right, organizations being able to predict floods and hurricanes 20 times, 100 times better than we could have before with AI. Agentic AI assistants that can theoretically in the next year be able to plan an event for you, call up a caterer, create the event for you, send out the invites, and then also book your calendar and a bunch of other people's calendars, all with just one phrase, help me set up this party, with these parameters. We're moving forward, things are happening. And so, I'm curious where this is going to go for cyber. Yeah,
I think AI is kind of like the internet. Now, we didn't really know what it was going to become.
No idea.
Had no idea how it would be part of our lives. It's like this amazing new tool we're going to have where I don't think we can wrap our heads around how we're going to use it.
Yeah, no, 100%. We're like in, the 2000s of AI, right? If you're comparing it to the internet, and I 100% agree. So think about what you were doing in 2000 with the internet, and that's approximately where we are with AI.
Yeah.
So like, there's a huge growth curve. No idea.
It'd be fascinating.
Invest in all those AI companies.
Yeah. Well, some people say there's a bubble. We'll see.
I don't know. Is there a bubble with internet companies? I mean,
it was the .com bubble.
but like it's not like they all didn't, like a lot of people didn't come back. Like the smart, good players are still here.
Yeah. The bubble didn't pop. It deflated a bit.
Yeah. I mean, well, sure. Like, don't invest in the stupid ones. I mean,
and therein lies the rub.
Therein lies the rub. This is not investment advice.
This is not a financial investment podcast. Let me make you queen for a day.
Ooh.
But use my excessive amount of influence to do that.
All right.
I make you queen for a day. What are your priorities to get done and pass and change?
Well, I'd pass CISA 2015. I'd pass the state and local cyber grant program reauthorization. I would move forward with all of that secure by design work that we've been doing. I would, probably get Christoph Kern to like put all of his ideas and move them forward in secure by design. I think there's any number of different things. I'd bring CSRB back.
What's that?
The Cyber Safety Review Board. It's been it was decommissioned at the beginning of this administration, I think, for a review. And I think there have been conversations about how to bring it back and in what form. And I would, I think there's a number of different changes we can make, right? I think there have been a lot of conversations around, how do you make it so that private sector and government players can participate without the conflict of interest or the perception of conflict of interest. So I think there's a number of things we should address there. And then, we can also make sure that the terms are right. Do we give it subpoena authority or not? I think the conversation has landed that we're probably not, that the CSRB is probably not going to get subpoena authority, but we need that back. We need an entity that is reviewing cyber incidents, that is giving us insight into what happened, giving us recommendations on what to fix, identifying trends, right? And one more. Can I have one more? I have one more. Okay.
You can have another day.
Thank you. That would be really fun. I would also institute the Bureau of Cyber Statistics. We need statistics. We need to track cyber statistics. It is very difficult to know what you're doing if you have no trend data. Imagine the Fed making decisions about our financial, like our markets, without any financial data.
That rich history of data, yeah.
Imagine, and that's where we are with cyber. We're just like shooting in the dark. Try, like I give you this. Try to find how many cyber incidents happened last year.
To who?
Exactly.
Yeah. There's no standard. There's
no standardization. It's not broken down by sector. It's not broken down by type of incident. There's not data for last year. There's not even data for the year before.
Right. There's some data
you ask it,
on people who voluntarily disclose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even that is sparse.
Yeah.
And not collected anywhere. Theoretically, after CIRCIA is implemented and CISA is tracking all of that data, hopefully we'll get some of that data out of there. But those aren't the only statistics. Imagine the huge ecosystem of statistics, like it's huge. There's so much information out there, and like we are debating about like, is CyberSeek right about the number of cyber jobs that are open, or like is Gardner right? I don't know.
Right. It seems like everyone's just grasping at straws and shooting 100%. In the dark. Yeah.
100%. And so you're that CISO, right, at a small company like that you're going in to help. Of course they're sad, and most of their programs are below the line, because they can't point to anything to say like, well, from here to here to here, I can show you that like cyber incidents have gone up, particularly like say, for example, from China. And the statistics show that this is the type of issue that our sector is getting hit with most. Therefore, can I have this tool to prevent against that number one issue?
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, I don't have the influence to make you queen for today, but I will continue to work on that. And should
we can work on it together.
I was going to say, should either of us end up in a position to put those things forward, I think on the whole, those are all good ideas.
Thank you.
So the tradition on the Watchers is we are an optimistic podcast. We talk about difficult challenges. We talk about the state of the world being challenging, and that's a good thing. It gives us work to do, but keeps a trend toward pessimism. Like these are tough things.
Yeah.
But we're optimists.
Yeah.
What keeps you optimistic?
So much keeps me optimistic. I work with, and I think it's like the people, like so many excellent, brilliant, well-intentioned people are working these issues. Every day I work with, hundreds of them. Hundreds is probably a lot. 50 to 100. I talk to a lot of people. I talk a lot. But, they are working any number of different issues. They are advocating for new policy ideas. They are working with the private sector people like Christoph Kern, like just give me so much hope for where we can go. And I think that the U.S. has always been at the forefront of this. And I look at what we've been able to develop with AI. Like look at, what OpenAI and Google have been able to do. It's incredible. And so I remain optimistic about the state of cybersecurity. I think that when push comes to shove, we will do the right thing, as the U.S. has always done. And I think that we will be able to address the issues that exist. And I think that, every year we get more information. We get better at it. It's not that we don't fail. The OWASP top 10 list being a glaring example of some failures. But people keep working on it, keep trying. And I think that, if you've got that, then you can win. Well,
Tatyana, where can people find you and support your work, and where can they help you become queen for a day?
Oh, I appreciate that. So, I'm a principal at Monument Advocacy, and so you can always reach out to me there. And I'm also, we can also look at otcybercoalition.org for our work around OT security, and stratcybercoalition.com for all of the work that we do around cyber and FMS and FMF. And all our policy positions and our contact information are there.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that the episode notes include links to all that stuff.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Watchers. For more great content, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our channel. We'll see you on the next one.